My name is Amanda. 2 weeks ago, I got a collection notice for $41,000 in nursing home bills, all with my signature. I'd never signed any of it. That afternoon, my sister Rebecca called, concerned. Just sign whatever they send, I'll handle things. I smiled, nodded, then drove to the nursing home. The front desk clerk pulled out a stack of photocopies, leaned in, whispered, "Honey, I keep copies of everything, every single one." My mother Margaret entered Oak Ridge Nursing 8 months ago after a stroke. My sister Rebecca handled the admissions. She lived closer, said she'd take care of everything. I trusted her completely. Then came the collection calls, the forged signatures, and the photocopies that proved the fraud. But the real betrayal had been spinning for months, hidden in bank statements and a power of attorney I never signed. It started with a phone call I barely remember now, a Tuesday in March, rain hitting my windshield as I sat in a parking lot outside a Starbucks. Rebecca's voice calm, controlled. "Mom had a stroke. They're at County General. I'm on my way." She lived 20 minutes from Mom's house in Ellisburg. I was 4 hours away in the city, juggling 2 jobs and a lease I couldn't break. She said, "Don't worry, I'll handle everything. I'm the one closer, it just makes sense." I agreed. I sent flowers. I said the words you say when you think your family is doing what's best. The stroke left Margaret with partial paralysis on her left side and aphasia that made speech halting, unreliable. The doctors recommended skilled nursing. Rebecca toured 3 facilities, chose Oak Ridge Nursing and Rehabilitation, a modest brick building off Route 9 with clean rooms and a courtyard garden. I visited 2 weekends later. Mom smiled when she saw me, grabbed my hand, squeezed twice. She couldn't say much, but her eyes were clear. Rebecca handed me a clipboard. "Admission paperwork, just the family contact form. I already took care of the financial stuff." I signed the contact page, added my phone number, gave it back. I never saw the rest of the intake packet. Never saw the line where responsible party was filled in. Never saw the signature beneath mine, a signature I hadn't written. For 6 months, I called Mom every other day, visited when I could. The bills, I assumed, were being handled from her pension and Social Security, just as Rebecca promised. Then the first letter arrived at my apartment in early October. Oak Ridge Nursing, Billing Department. Stamped past due in red at the top. The amount, $11,400. I called Rebecca. She laughed. "It's a clerical error. They do this all the time. I'll call them tomorrow." A week later, another letter. 17,000. Then a collection notice, certified mail, signature required. $41,000 total, and attached to the bottom of the notice, a photocopy of an admission agreement. My name, my supposed signature, looped A, crossed T, the way I write, only it was. The slant was slightly too steep, the pressure uniform in a way handwriting never is. I stared at it until the lines blurred. Then I got in my car and drove 4 hours to Oak Ridge. The front desk was quiet when I arrived. Fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant and mashed potatoes from the dining hall. A woman in her 60s with silver-rimmed glasses and a laminated name tag, Nancy, looked up. I explained who I was, why I was there. She didn't flinch. She reached below the counter, pulled out a tan accordion folder, opened it flat. Inside, photocopies. Page after page of admission documents, insurance forms, a financial responsibility agreement, all signed in my name. She spread them across the counter like evidence on a courtroom table. "Honey," she said, voice low, "I keep copies of every document that crosses this desk, every single one." Then she turned to a page I'd never seen, a durable power of attorney, notarized, granting Rebecca full control over Margaret's finances and healthcare decisions. My name was on the signature line. The date was 3 days after Mom's stroke. "That's not my signature," I whispered. Nancy looked at me, then at the paper, then back at me. "I know," she said. "I've been waiting for you to come." I left the building with copies in my bag and a cold knot tightening in my stomach. That afternoon, I logged into my mother's bank accounts from a motel room off the interstate. The pension deposits, $1,500 a month, hit regularly, then vanished in transfers to an account I didn't recognize. $22,000 total over 6 months, siphoned out in increments of 2 and 3,000. The account routing led to a regional bank with a branch in Ellisburg. Rebecca's bank. My sister hadn't just forged my signature on nursing home bills she let go unpaid. She'd been draining our mother's account while Margaret sat in a facility bed, unable to speak the words that would expose her. I sat in that motel room with the bank statements spread across the polyester bedspread and a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The account that had received the transfers, the one with Rebecca's bank, showed not just the pension deposits but regular withdrawals at an ATM 2 blocks from her apartment. Cash, always in round numbers, always just below the reporting threshold. 400, 600. On one Tuesday, 800. I cross-referenced the dates with Mom's nursing home statements. The bills were piling up unaddressed while Rebecca drained exactly enough each month to keep the account from hitting zero. She wasn't paying the facility. She was paying herself. I called her the next morning, kept my voice steady. "Rebecca, I went to Oak Ridge. I saw the admission documents. They have copies of everything." A pause, 4 seconds. Then her voice, flat, unblinking. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I signed what they told me to sign. Mom needed care. You were never there." She hung up. I called back, voicemail. I called a third time, blocked. That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding or some clerical error. This was a strategy, and I had been the mark. I drove back to Oak Ridge that afternoon. Nancy was at the front desk, same glasses, same quiet vigilance. I asked if there was anything else she'd kept. She didn't answer right away. She looked down the hall toward the administrator's office, then back at me. "Come with me," she said. We walked past the nurse's station into a small records room lined with filing cabinets. She pulled open a bottom drawer, heavy with folders, and withdrew a stack of papers maybe 2 inches thick. Every intake document for the last 18 months. I started keeping copies after the first time. The first time. "You're not the only family member who's walked in here with a collection letter and no idea what their signature was on. You're just the first one who came asking before the sheriff did." She spread the papers across a metal table. I saw my mother's admission agreement, yes, but also forms I'd never heard of. A Medicaid application submitted 3 weeks after her stroke, listing household assets as zero. A vehicle title transfer for Mom's car, a 12-year-old sedan, signed over to Rebecca. And a durable power of attorney, the one I'd glimpsed, notarized by a name that Nancy had already circled in red pen. "That notary doesn't exist," she said. "I checked. No record in the state database. No stamp registered. That POA is a piece of fiction." My knees went weak. I sat down hard on a rolling stool, the stack of papers blurring in front of me. "So everything she did under that power of attorney was illegal," Nancy finished. "Every financial decision, every asset transfer, every signature she claimed was yours or your mother's. Void if you challenge it." She paused, pulled a single sheet from the bottom of the pile. "But there's more." She handed me a photocopy of a quitclaim deed, recorded with the county 3 months after Mom's admission. The house, the Ellisburg house where we'd grown up, the house Mom had paid off a decade ago, was now titled in Rebecca's name. Transfer consideration, love and affection. Mom's supposed signature at the bottom, wobbly and misshapen. A forgery of a stroke survivor's hand. Not even a good one. I stared at that page until the fluorescent light above me started to pulse with my heartbeat. "She sold the house," I whispered. Nancy nodded. "Closed 6 weeks ago. I only know because the new owner called here looking for a forwarding address for your mother's mail. Rebecca never told the facility." The house had been worth at least $200,000, a figure I knew from a casual conversation years ago when Mom had considered downsizing. Rebecca had walked away with everything. The pension was pocket change. The house was the real target. That evening, I called an attorney, a woman named Diane Corbin who specialized in elder law and financial abuse cases. I sent her the photocopies Nancy had given me. She called back 20 minutes later. "I've been doing this work for 22 years, she said, her voice low and tight. "I've seen power of attorney abuse. I've seen forged signatures. I've seen families steal from each other. But this, the quitclaim deed, the fake notary, the vanishing pension, this is a felony, multiple felonies. And the paper trail is complete." She paused. "Your sister knew exactly what she was doing, and she counted on you never finding out before the estate was stripped bare." The next morning, I sat in my car outside the county courthouse, waiting for it to open. At 9 a.m., I walked into the recorder's office and pulled the official property records. There it was, the quitclaim deed, stamped and filed with a county clerk's notation in the margin. The deed had been recorded without a hitch because it was accompanied by the forged power of attorney and a notarized statement from Rebecca claiming Margaret was mentally competent at the time of signing. The same Margaret who couldn't string 3 words together after her stroke. The clerk had no reason to question it. It looked legal. I stood at that counter with my hands shaking and my mind calculating the timeline. Rebecca had been planning this before Mom even left the hospital. The power of attorney was dated 3 days after the stroke. The vehicle title transfer 2 weeks after that. The quitclaim deed a month later, while Mom was still adjusting to life in a wheelchair, unable to dial a phone without assistance. And the nursing home bills, left unpaid deliberately because Rebecca never intended to cover a single dollar of Mom's care from her own pocket. The pension had been funneled away. The house had been sold. Mom was financially gutted, and the debt was falling on me because my forged name, was on every admissions document. But here's where the story turns. Because Nancy, the front desk clerk with the photocopied files, had given me something Rebecca never accounted for, a complete, unaltered paper trail showing exactly who signed what and when. And Diane Corbin, the attorney, had already drafted a petition to void the power of attorney and freeze any remaining assets in Rebecca's name. "We file this morning," she said. "Then we go to the district attorney. Your sister is about to learn that forgery doesn't just void documents, it creates criminal charges." I texted Rebecca one last time from the courthouse steps. "I've seen the deed. I've seen the accounts. I've given everything to a lawyer. Call me before the police do." 3 dots appeared on my phone, then disappeared. Then a single reply, "You'll regret this." I didn't know what she meant yet. I would find out within 48 hours, when a process server showed up at my apartment with a restraining order filed by Rebecca, alleging I had been harassing her and was a danger to our mother. She was no longer just defending herself. She was attacking, and the next move would decide everything. The restraining order landed on a Thursday, signed by a judge I'd never met, based on an affidavit from Rebecca claiming I'd been stalking her, threatening her, showing up at her workplace unannounced. None of it was true, but the order was real temporary, pending a full hearing set for 5 days later. In the meantime, I couldn't go within 500 feet of my sister, couldn't contact her, couldn't set foot at Oak Ridge if she happened to be visiting Mom. The facility called that afternoon. Rebecca had already faxed them a copy, requesting I be barred from the premises for my mother's safety. Nancy pulled the fax from the machine and called me instead. "They're trying to isolate her," she said. "She's been here every day this week, sweet as pie, telling the staff you've been unstable." This was the escalation I hadn't prepared for. Not a legal fight over forged documents. That, at least, was paper versus paper. This was a campaign to discredit me, to paint me as the dangerous daughter while she positioned herself as the devoted one. And behind a restraining order, she could quietly move Mom to another facility out of state where I couldn't find her. She could sell whatever was left. She could vanish. I called Diane Corbin immediately. She listened, calm as always, then said, "This is actually a gift. She just gave us a sworn affidavit under penalty of perjury. When we prove she lied about the harassment, not only does the restraining order collapse, but she's committed perjury, another felony. And she's just put her credibility on the record." Diane filed an emergency motion to consolidate the restraining order hearing with an evidentiary hearing on the forged documents. The judge agreed. 5 days. Everything would be decided in a single courtroom session. The hearing was held in a windowless courtroom at the county courthouse, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Rebecca sat on the other side, wearing a navy blazer that made her look like a bank manager. She didn't look at me. She looked at the judge as if she were the victim. Her attorney, a young man with an overstuffed briefcase, argued that I had been sending threatening texts, showing up at her apartment, causing emotional distress. He submitted her affidavit. I watched the judge read it, his expression unreadable. Then Diane stood. She walked to the table and, one by one, laid out Nancy's photocopies. The admission agreement with the forged signature, the fake power of attorney, the Medicaid application that listed 0 assets, the vehicle title transfer, the quitclaim deed for the house, and the bank records. $22,000 siphoned from Margaret's pension account into Rebecca's personal checking. Then she handed the judge a sworn statement from the state notary division. No record of the notary whose stamp appeared on the power of attorney. The stamp was fabricated. The signature on the POA, according to a handwriting expert's preliminary analysis, shared significant discordance with Margaret's known samples. She'd been unable to hold a pen with her dominant hand after the stroke, let alone produce a fluent signature. The judge looked up from the stack. "Ms. Kavanaugh," he said, using Rebecca's married name, Can you explain why your mother's supposed signature appears on a deed recorded 6 weeks after a stroke that left her with aphasia and left-side paralysis? Rebecca's face tightened. I don't know, she said. My sister must have arranged that. She's been trying to take over everything. Diane then produced the bank records, pointed to the transfers. These transfers were initiated from a device registered to Ms. Kavanaugh's home IP address. The withdrawals were made at an ATM 3 blocks from her apartment. Your Honor, this is not a family disagreement. This is a systematic financial exploitation of a vulnerable elder, facilitated by forged documents, a fake notary seal, and as we just saw, false accusations under oath. The judge recessed for 15 minutes. When he returned, he vacated the restraining order immediately, dismissed it with prejudice. Then he looked at Rebecca. I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation. You are ordered to freeze all assets traceable to your mother, including proceeds from the sale of the Ellisburg property, pending further review. Rebecca didn't speak. Her attorney shuffled papers. As the bailiff approached her with the asset freeze order, she stood abruptly, chair scraping linoleum, and walked out. She didn't run. She strode, like someone who still believed she could outmaneuver the system. I thought that was the end of the worst revelations. I was wrong. Diane called me 3 days later with a voice that meant she'd found something. We pulled the title history on the Ellisburg house, she said. Your mother refinanced it 5 years ago, a small home equity loan to cover some medical bills, $50,000. The loan was paid off, but the bank still holds the lien release documents. She paused. The signature on the lien release is also forged. Different notary, same problem, no record. But here's the piece that changes everything. The loan was paid off not with Mom's money, but with a check from an account that belongs to a man named Victor Cross. I didn't recognize the name. Victor Cross is a private investor in the area who specializes in what's called elderly asset acquisition. He buys distressed properties from seniors who don't have legal representation, often at a fraction of market value. He pays off small liens to gain leverage. We think Rebecca brought him in as a buyer before she ever filed the quitclaim deed. She was lining up a sale while Mom was still in the hospital. This was no longer a daughter stealing from her mother. This was a coordinated property grab with a third party who might have known, or should have known, that the title was fraudulent. Diane forwarded me the lien release. Victor Cross's name was typed at the bottom of the cashier's check. The check memo said, Margaret Kavanaugh lien satisfaction Ellisburg property. But Mom never met Victor Cross. She couldn't have. She was in a hospital bed, learning to swallow again, while someone signed her name and sold her home out from under her. Meanwhile, Rebecca wasn't finished. The day the asset freeze hit her bank, she walked into Oak Ridge and tried to discharge Mom against medical advice. She had no legal authority. The fake POA had been voided. The real Amanda was now recognized as next of kin. But she told the charge nurse there was a family emergency, and she needed to move Mom to a facility in Nevada. Nevada has no state income tax and stronger debtor protections. Diane later explained she was likely trying to move assets beyond reach. Nancy blocked it. She stood at the front desk, arms crossed, and said, I'm sorry, but we've received a court order this morning that any discharge requires the signature of Amanda Kavanaugh, not Rebecca. I can't release the patient. Rebecca screamed. Security was called. She left in a flurry of threats. That night, I drove to Oak Ridge to see Mom. She was in her bed, the television playing some game show she couldn't follow. I sat beside her, held her hand. She looked at me, her eyes watery, and with enormous effort raised her left hand, the paralyzed one, a few inches off the blanket. She pointed at the bedside table. I opened the drawer. Inside, a small leather journal I recognized from her house. The pages were blank except for one. In shaky, barely legible letters, she had written, Becky took key. I held up the journal. The house key, Mom, she nodded. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She'd known. She'd been unable to speak it, but she'd known her own daughter was stripping her life away, and she'd been trying to tell someone for months. I leaned in and whispered what I'd come to say. I'm getting it back. Everything, I promise. The district attorney filed charges the following Tuesday. 5 counts of felony forgery, elder financial exploitation, perjury, and conspiracy to commit fraud. A warrant was issued for Rebecca's arrest. But when the police arrived at her apartment, she was gone. The closets were empty, the computer hard drive was missing, and on the kitchen counter sat a manila envelope with my name on it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a cashier's check for $50,000 drawn on a bank in Reno, payable to me, and a handwritten note. This makes us even. Drop the charges and I disappear for good. If not, I can make things much worse for Mom. I still have keys you don't know about. I was holding a bribe wrapped in a threat. For the first time since this nightmare started, I realized Rebecca wasn't just greedy or broken, she was dangerous. The kind of dangerous that doesn't stop until someone forces her to. I called Diane. She listened to the note, then said quietly, "We're not dropping anything, but we need to move your mom before Rebecca comes back." That was on a Friday. By Monday morning, I had secured a bed at a locked memory care unit an hour away, a place Rebecca couldn't access without my approval. I was at the bank, depositing the bribe check into an evidence account for the DA, when my phone rang. It was Nancy. "She's here," Nancy whispered. "Rebecca, she's in the parking lot with movers. She's trying to take your mom out the back." I hung up and called 911 while I was already backing out of the bank parking lot. Nancy stayed on the line, her voice low, describing every movement. The white van parked crooked at the loading dock, a man in a ball cap wheeling a gurney through the service entrance, Rebecca directing him toward the memory care wing. I was 20 minutes away. The dispatcher said officers were en route. I drove 70 miles an hour through yellow lights, hands tight on the wheel, the bribe check still sitting on my passenger seat like a grenade. By the time I reached Oak Ridge, 2 patrol cars were blocking the rear lot. Rebecca stood beside the van, arms crossed, her face twisted into something between fury and disbelief. The movers, confused, clearly hired without context, were sitting on the loading dock steps, hands on their knees answering a deputy's questions. Nancy stood in the doorway of the service entrance, still wearing her phone headset, and when she saw me, she simply nodded. She'd held the line. Mom was upstairs in her room, unaware of the chaos unfolding 3 floors below. The arresting officer walked Rebecca to the patrol car. She passed within 5 feet of me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same vanilla scent she'd worn since high school. She looked at me, her eyes flat and cold. "You think you've won something," she said. "You haven't. This isn't over." The deputy opened the door, placed a hand on her head to guide her into the back seat, and she kept talking, her voice rising, saying things I won't repeat here. The door closed. The car pulled away. She was still talking to no one. The charges filed that week included 5 felony counts: forgery, elder financial exploitation, perjury, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted kidnapping, because taking Mom without legal authority, against a court order, qualified under state law. The fake notary seal triggered a separate investigation by the Secretary of State's office. Victor Cross, the investor who'd paid off the lien with the plan to buy the house, was interviewed by detectives. He claimed ignorance, insisted he'd been told Rebecca held full power of attorney, but the paper trail suggested otherwise. He'd accepted a notarized document without verifying the notary. His lawyer cut a deal: full cooperation in exchange for immunity on the conspiracy charge. He surrendered all documents related to the transaction, including emails in which Rebecca referred to our mother as incompetent but cooperative. Those words were read aloud at her arraignment. The asset freeze held. The $22,000 Rebecca had drained from Mom's pension was partially recovered. About $16,000 remained in her checking account. The rest she'd spent. The house, already sold, couldn't be returned, but the proceeds were frozen and eventually released to a court-supervised trust for Mom's care. $212,000, sitting in an escrow account Rebecca couldn't touch. The quitclaim deed was voided retroactively, a legal nullity, as if it had never existed. The power of attorney, the document she'd built her entire scheme on, was vacated. I filed for emergency guardianship the following Monday and was appointed within 72 hours. But here's the twist I didn't see coming until Diane called with the final accounting. The bribe check Rebecca left, the $50,000 she'd offered to make me even, was drawn on a separate account she'd hidden from the initial asset freeze. A money market account, opened in her name only, containing the last of the house proceeds she hadn't yet spent or transferred. Nearly $80,000. She'd essentially handed me a map to her escape fund while trying to buy my silence. The district attorney froze the account the same day. Mom would recover almost everything. I walked into Oak Ridge 3 days later with a court order and a folder full of Nancy's photocopies. The administrator met me in the lobby, apologetic and pale. The $41,000 in nursing home bills, voided. Not just forgiven, legally unenforceable, because the signature on the admissions agreement was fraudulent, and the facility had been notified of the forgery. They couldn't collect from me, and they couldn't collect from Mom, because her assets had been stolen by the person who'd signed her in. I didn't gloat. I just asked for a final discharge summary. I moved Mom to a better facility that Saturday. Not a faded brick building off a highway, but a place called Maplewood, a single-story residence with wide windows, garden paths, and a therapy pool where she could rebuild strength in her left side. Her room overlooked a courtyard with a bird feeder. She couldn't say much when I wheeled her inside for the first time, but she squeezed my hand twice, just like she had months earlier, and her eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. Nancy retired 2 months after this ended. She'd worked at Oak Ridge for 18 years, she told me, and she'd seen things that made her keep copies long before my case. A son who'd sold his father's house without telling the siblings. A niece who'd maxed out an aunt's credit cards. She kept records because she knew that eventually someone would come looking. I sent her flowers the day she left, sunflowers, the kind her desk had faced every morning. The card said, "You didn't just keep copies, you kept the truth." Rebecca pled guilty to 3 counts in exchange for a consolidated sentence, 3 to 5 years, with restitution ordered in the full amount of the stolen pension funds. At the sentencing hearing, she was offered the chance to speak. She stood, turned toward me, not the judge, and said, "I really did think I was taking care of things." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Mom lives at Maplewood now. I visit every Sunday. She's still got aphasia, but her face lights up when I walk in, and she's started writing again, slow, painstaking letters in that same leather journal. Last week, she handed me a new page. 4 words. "You kept your promise." I think about that moment a lot. Not the courtroom, not the arrest. The moment Nancy told me she kept copies of everything. One woman at a front desk, doing her job with a quiet diligence nobody asked for, and that single habit saved my mother's future. Truth doesn't disappear. It just waits for someone to make a record of it, and someone else to come looking. The statistics are staggering. 90% of elder financial exploitation is committed by family members or trusted others. That means the person draining the account is usually sitting at the Thanksgiving table. The forged signature is on a document everyone assumed was legitimate. The house gets sold, the pension gets siphoned, and the victim is too impaired or too ashamed to speak up. But paper doesn't forget. Photocopies don't lie. And a person willing to ask one more question can unravel an entire scheme. If you're listening to this and something tugs at you, a suspicion about an aunt's new helpful neighbor, a cousin who suddenly has power of attorney, a nursing home bill with a signature that looks a little off, trust that instinct. Ask for the documents. Check the notary registry. Be the person who keeps copies. You might be the only one who does. My mother still can't say many words, but she wrote 4 that I keep in my wallet. "You kept your promise." I nearly didn't. I almost let the fear, the restraining order, the bribe check, the sheer exhaustion of fighting my own sister make me consider dropping it all. But I didn't. Because a promise isn't something you keep when it's easy. It's something you keep when it costs you everything. So now I have a question for you. If you had to protect someone you love from someone else they love, would you have the courage to follow the paper trail? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know your story. If this stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and check the description for more stories like this. I'll see you in the next one.